forward if it can offer long-term contracts to a giant buyer like China. China's deepening energy cooperation with Canada also shows that some diplomatic right. China is similarly sending messages that you can cooperate more with us in response to the US. Some analyses interpret this as China is searching on every front to find a friend against the US. On the LNG front, it should be remembered that the US has doubled its LNG exports in 5 years, with the shale gas revolution, focusing especially on meeting demand in Asia. China is one of the largest LNG importers. In 2021, for example, China overtook Japan to become the world's #1 LNG importer. But in the trade war atmosphere, China's tariffs on US-sourced LNG, and even zero purchase policy for some states, have put American LNG companies in a very difficult position. While they were looking for markets to sell the increased production, they suddenly lost their biggest customer. They have therefore tried to make deals with European buyers, but Europe is not accepting every offer due to political concerns and price competition. Recently, Europe has turned to LNG because of the Russia-Ukraine crisis, but the price of US LNG can also be high in Europe. As a result, there are fluctuations in LNG exports, undermining the expectation of a stable and growing market. Of course, Canada has an alliance with the United States, but at this point, trade runs on a different axis. Although Canadian companies ask, will doing business directly with China anger the US? In the end, each company is thinking about its own profits. In any case, the Canadian government does not want to get involved in diplomacy, saying this is a commercial issue between privatized oil companies and Chinese buyers. All of this reveals that in the big picture, there is a multi-dimensional power struggle between the US and China. There are confrontations and retaliations in every field, from technology to agriculture, finance to energy. Energy trade is one of the big weapons in the hands of both sides. When the US says, I'll tax your product, China retaliates by saying, then I won't buy your oil and gas. As a result, exports of US oil to China have fallen by 90%. LNG has been reduced to zero, and China is cooperating more with Canada and Russia. This shift will even affect the global oil and gas flow map. In the long run, we could see an energy corridor turn from the US to Canada. This could strengthen Canada diplomatically and economically. It is not clear where this tension will lead. According to one scenario, the US and China will sit down at the table after a while. The trade war schedule will soften and energy flows will return to normal. In the other scenario, the tensions would become permanent. Beijing would continue its almost complete shift away from US oil and LNG trend, and American exporters would turn to other markets. In that case, China would make huge deals with Canada, buy discounted oil from Russia, and strengthen its relations with other OPEC Plus countries. The US would lose market share in the Far East, and perhaps develop a more aggressive sales policy in Europe and Latin America. However, the loss of a giant customer like China does not seem to be easily compensated for American energy companies. Especially in this period when the global economy is recovering after the pandemic, everyone's eyes are on the rise in energy demand again. China remains one of the largest importers, meeting a significant portion of this demand. So where will this painful process lead? For now, there is no clear end. Both giants are likely to maintain their positions. The US shows no sign of lifting tariffs that extend to 2025, while China says we will continue to respond. This shift in the energy sector may last until 2026-2027. Years of trade war could further fragment the world economy and disrupt global supply chains. In the end, all sides come out of this friction with a loss, but political calculations may not care about that loss, experts say. Some predict that the US will show leadership during the re-election period and turn things around, but the political environment is very volatile. There are more voices in the US saying let's not trade with China, and more voices in China saying let's cut dependence on the US. Under the shadow of such populist rhetoric, diplomacy is weakening and trade flows are being reshaped. To summarize, China has closed the door to the US for oil, and Canada is the new partner. This is just a snapshot of the fracturing of global energy markets, but it is a striking one. The numbers point to extraordinary developments, such as a 90% drop in China's oil imports from the US and a near zero LNG purchase. Turning to Canada, China is both retaliating against the US by buying Canadian crude oil at record levels and creating alternative supply networks between Russia and Canada. The US, on the other hand, is trying to compensate for the loss of this huge market from other geographies, but exporters and investors are uneasy due to the trade war atmosphere. This new equilibrium also reveals the cost of the trade war in the energy sector. For now, there is no short-term answer to the question of who will win and who will lose. But what is clear is that the tensions between Washington and Beijing have the power to upset even the world energy map. Every aspect of trade is now politicized, and energy is no exception. Thank you for choosing us.
China has appointed a new international trade negotiator following the outbreak of a devastating